There it is, Dan Parks. A big year, a year where a new Wallabies coach arrived. And if you can believe it or not, the same coach is going to start 2025 as Wallabies coach. So we're not going to have a fourth straight year of four consecutive coaches. Might we have one later post the Lions? That remains to be seen. But a heck of a year, and it finished in Dublin. Parksy, can you believe it? The international calendar, the international season is done for another year.
Well, it certainly has been a long year, but yeah, it's been quite a, I guess, a topsy turvy one. You'd probably say for the Wallabies, but I think the great thing is it's 2-2 on this tour, but I think it's ended in quite a positive way in comparison to where the Wallabies probably were, a couple of months back. A lot of negativity around the sport, and I think since the team or the squad has been away in Europe, I think they've done great. 2 big wins early in the campaign, and Scotland probably on the day just a little bit too strong, and that game on the weekend clearly could have gone either way, and that's why Ireland are in the top 3 sides in the world at the moment, because they just know how to win games. It's no fluke that they've won. They were on I think it was 32 out of 36 games they'd won. It was like a big number. So yeah, I think credit goes to Ireland, but also the Wallabies, I think, are in comparison to where they were a couple of months, I reckon they're in a pretty good shape.
I completely agree with you. Okay, so coming up on the pod today, we're going to be speaking about, of course, the test match over the weekend in Dublin. Bernard Jackman, former Irish international, one of the leading pundits in the world, will be joining a little bit later too. But we're also going to get the rule book out, see who was the breakout stars, who were the player of the year. We're going to have an absolute year of review for this Wallabies side, but we're going to look ahead to the Lions as well and go, what's this 23 going to look like? And I can tell you what, Joe Schmidt is much further along this road than he would have been at the start of January when he admitted that he didn't know a lot about them. So heaps coming up on this episode of the Raw Rugby podcast. I'm Christy Doran, and joining me, Dan Parks. So in case you missed it, a 22-19 win for Ireland over the weekend. Probably didn't surprise too many people. As you were saying, Dan, they're a top 3 side in the world. But I'll tell you what, when it was 10 points to 5 and then 13-5, you kind of thought that the Wallabies were very much in this and they could go on to win. But 3 straight matches at the Aviva, and Ireland have come out against the Wallabies on top by 3 points. It's pretty remarkable. 2014 against Michael Checker's side, 2016 rather, and then in 2022 against Dave Rennie's side, it was 13 points to 10, and then just on the weekend now 22-19. Kind of crazy, but yeah, can't be too surprised, can we?
I don't think we can be surprised. I think there's clearly there's a lot of expectation currently on the back of, I think, what happened in that game 1. I think me personally, I don't know how much the local rugby fraternity knows about what's going on in Europe in regards to how strong England are at the moment, how strong Wales are, clearly Scotland and Ireland. And I think on the back of winning those early 2 games, I think the expectation was, well, we'll just win the rest of the tour. And unfortunately, that's not the way the state of the game is in Europe at the moment. In Six Nations rugby at the moment, you're looking at Ireland, France, and possibly Scotland as potentially being the top 3 teams. So, it was no surprise, obviously, to me to see the Wallabies go down somewhat narrowly, you'd have to say, on the weekend, to, again, a very strong Irish team. You saw, in particular, the last 2 weeks, the crowd's involvement in both the games. I think that's played a huge role. I think on the weekend as well, the Australian defence outside, I'd say, the 10-metre line, I thought was really, really strong. You could clearly see whenever Ireland got close to the try line, as in within 5 metres, that's where the issues occurred. And that's where their power game really came into it. And, pretty much all the tries were conceded when it was close to the line. And, the Wallabies, they were, I think, in many ways, a bit hard done by. There was I think it was a pretty clear knock on in the lead up to one of the Irish tries where the fullback, he went up for a high ball, clearly knocked
Hugo Keegan.
Yeah, it was a clear knock on, and we see a lot of those decisions go upstairs, or at some point it's reviewed and it comes back. And there was a couple of those. There was another one for the height of the tackler. I think it was McCarthy in the second row. again, we've seen these go to, a yellow card, and it didn't go the Wallabies' way. But, that's the game at the moment. And as I said, I think if you're a Wallabies fan and you're involved with the Wallabies group, I reckon you're feeling, I'll say this, a lot better than where you were when you left for tour, because I reckon it's in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I agree. I think they gave themselves a chance, didn't they? From a set piece perspective, it was a much better showing. They didn't necessarily get a scrum ascendancy there, but they had parity at the scrum. Their line out operated pretty well. Brandon Pangaromosa had a much better day at the office, but they only gave away 9 penalties as well. Any time that you give away less than 10 penalties, you're always going to be in the hunt. And that's possibly been, if you look at what happened with Michael Checker's last couple of years, definitely Dave Rennie's tenure, perhaps a little bit less so with Eddie Jones's brief one last year, but discipline has just been such an issue and problematic area for the Wallabies. So yeah, they at least gave themselves opportunities throughout this Autumn Nations Cup, the Spring Tour as it's known down here. So at least some of the basic principles and some of the ideas around core play has been helped massively over the last 10 months since Joe Schmidt was appointed at the end of January.
Oh, I think there's no question. I think if you look at potentially last week's game, it was clearly it's somewhat refereed differently. There was a lot of penalties in that game, and obviously there's a lot against the Wallabies, and so you just gave a quality team like Scotland countless opportunities, and it obviously came back to bite them a bit. But I think it was a great improvement in that regard. But I guess partly the issue there was it was where they were giving the penalties away. Just allowed Ireland to get in really, really strong positions. And as I said, when they got inside those 5-metre zones, they were pretty lethal. There's some big boys in that pack up front, and it just was a bit difficult defensively.
You're never going to win a game, though, or rarely going to win a game when you have only 26% of territory. That was, possession is not everything in rugby, but Ireland had 59% of possession, which is perhaps more than you would want against an Irish side that likes to retain the ball. They're very good at the recycle, the breakdowns, generally pretty clinical. But the fact that they had such little territory kind of goes to about where they gave away those penalties. Did they get enough pay from when they made some line breaks? Probably not. And that's, Joe Schmidt did touch upon it briefly, but when you have a Taniela Tupou that plucks a ball away and has a massive intercept, when you have a Nick Frost and Harry Wilson combined beautifully for a line break, midway through the first half as well, you want to get a bit more pay than what they did, because even after that, Tom Wright put the ball on the toe, tried to turn the Irish defence around, pin them in their corner, but the ball goes a little bit too long, goes into the opposition goal line, and then all of a sudden Ireland get a chance to not have a staggered line in defence. So a couple of areas there that they probably need to be a little bit more accurate with next year.
And I think if you look at both of those examples, the first one with Taniela Tupou, beautiful read. And again, that's the beauty of video and all the rest of it. Ireland are notorious for doing those trick plays, having, I think it was Keenan running that inside line. It was just a really good read by Tupou. Now, clearly on reflection, if he runs on a diagonal line to the left, links up with Joseph Akusu-Suaalii, we're probably talking about a different story, a potential try. As it turned out, it ended up being a penalty goal. But yeah, they're the fine lines in the game. And the funny part about the other one is when Frost, again, we saw him in the clear. How good's that been, seeing the big fella in the clear this Autumn Nation series? He got in the clear, he got tackled. And last week, if the Wallabies do that against Scotland, go down the short side on the back of the toe through and the Jorgensen breakdown, if they go to the right, they potentially score. McWright, he goes down the short side. They ended up defending it, whereas it's such a game of fine lines. If you go the reverse on both of those plays, as in last week, if you go down the short side, and this week, if you go open, you're probably looking at different results. So that's the fine lines we're talking about. There's not much there. And I reckon, as I said, it's really, really positive stuff. The other point we haven't really spoken about is the attack. What they're doing in attack, the beautiful ball movement and the ability of all the players to be able to shift ball, some of the forward skill level to be able to do those pullback passes to backs out the back, the options they're taking, more often than not, they seem to be the right ones. And I just thought, Ireland were very wise in regards to how they slowed the Wallabies ball down. It was was verging on very illegal throughout the majority of the game. But that's the game. If you can get away with it, then good luck to you. And I think on the weekend, Ireland clearly did that very well. And it just meant that as much as even that half second that the Wallabies wanted to go just beforehand, you could see Jake Gordon, and we've seen a lot of this, the frustration on his face, digging for ball. It has a big influence. And I reckon, again, that'll be another area that I'm sure the coaching staff will look at. And again, as I said, I just reckon they'll be pretty happy. I'm sure you want to make comment on this. I was really interested listening to some of the interviews from the players after the game, and you could see frustration, in particular in Fraser McBride at the end of his interview. Yeah, I was really interested to just sort of see how he was when he was asked certain questions about the Wallabies and where they are in regards to the tour and are they back and all this type of chat. I found that very interesting.
We'll come back. We'll come to that a little bit later on because I agree. Yeah, they're 6 from 13 at the end of the day for the year, aren't they? So it's less than 50% of test matches that they won. And the results and don't necessarily match up to the direction the Wallabies are going. There's a lot of positivity in the air, but at this point in time, it's not necessarily translating into wins, which at the end of the day is the currency that you live and swear by. But I agree. There was some nice ball movement. Josh Schmidt, he said in his post-match press interview on the field, he said, look, sometimes when you focus a lot on defence, kind of you don't get to spend as much time on the attack. And he probably didn't think that the attack was quite as fluent as he wanted it to be. But one play that I particularly loved and really well executed, and it was just such a Johnny Sexton play that Joe Schmidt would have worked with for so long, was the try to Jorgensen, wasn't it? Where Wasiliev gets the ball, touches it twice in a matter of a split second and runs around, and then Tom Wright with really good quick hands to get the ball to Jorgensen. That was just the DNA of Irish rugby over the last 10, 15 years.
100%. There's no question that Sexton became an expert at that play, feeding his outside man, and because he had calibre of, in the early days, O'Driscoll, as he went on, other quality centres there, players running really, really strong lines. He had that ability just to sweep out the back and to be able to link with some really quality players. And we saw it on the weekend with the Wallabies doing it. And again, I go back to that point about who are the people running the so-called decoy lines. I think it was Ikitau, beautiful line, straighten things up. And Akuso Suaalii, well, you're not going to let him run straight through a hole. You're always going to stay fixed on him, which is what the defence done. And then it was really classy to see Noah again. If he probably passes that ball early, defensively, might have shifted and got across, held it slightly, got the offload around the corner. And right, he absolutely got drilled when he gave the ball away. But again, that's the price you got to pay. And it was good to see. Because if you look at the other side, Kellaway, he sort of balked when he had the opportunity to score, and he tried to step back inside of Prendergast. And to be fair to the young fly half, was a great tackle. And on the left side, Jorgensen just pinned his ears back and scored in the corner. It was a quality try, and that's what I'm talking about. It was so great to see. They didn't score on the right side. They stayed patient, and that's what I liked about what I saw with Wasiliev. I think it was at least 2 or 3 phases of forwards punching hard and getting a little bit of momentum, and then he picked his moment to go to his attacking threats out wide, and it was a great score.
Let's dig a little bit deeper then around Wasiliev, because the number 10 jersey is something that it's been a bit of a revolving door. And you think about the Wallaby selection in the last 5 years, there's been no core, there's been no spine. Hooker's been a constant change. The 9's been a constant change, as has the 10, and similarly the fullback role too. We've finally started to see a bit of stability in selection in those key positions. And Matt Fessler obviously missed the last 2 tests, but he was wearing the 2 jersey for the vast majority of the year. Jake Gordon was definitely Joe Schmidt's preference. Noel Wasiliev started in all but 2 of those test matches. And Tom Wright, I'm pretty sure he played every minute of every test. So in and around 19 new faces, 48 players used throughout the year. I think the Wallabies just had the benefit, and they managed to grow because of the patience and the trust that Joe Schmidt had in certain players throughout this year about this is where we're starting, this is where we need to get to.
Yeah, I think, and I'm sure we're going to get to that a bit later on with our Lions potential 23, but if you sort of go through that spine, I guess, if you want to call it, on the weekend, I thought Brendan Paenga-Amosa was outstanding. I thought he did a great job of things, in particular around the line out. It seemed to function really, really smoothly. The back row to me looks, I would say, pretty set. You're looking at the halves. Yes, we talk about Jake Gordon and Noah Lolesio. I think, at the end of the day, Jake, I think, started 3 of the tests, and Noah all 4 of them. So to me, that's a positive thing. And I think, coming from a fly half's perspective, it just shows a lot, or says a lot, about where the coach is at with you. And I can tell you now, players don't want to not play. So when you hear things about, he's been rested for this game and that game, it's a 4-week tour. No one wants to rest in 4 games. They want to be playing every single week. So, the fact that Joe, again, he stuck with Noah and he stuck with, well, obviously Tom Wright. I think he's a dead set moral in that position because he's always such a danger. So I think it's a very positive sign. Again, injuries play a role in any selection, but I would have to say, in regards to where they're currently at, it's good to see them sticking with those guys. And again, positions around that, we talk about the spine, but there's so many other positions where you'd almost, Lenny Ikitau this season has been quite superb. Andrew Kellaway, every single week, he's probably the most consistent performer on that field. We saw on the weekend, some of his defence at times was just superb. So there's a lot of, I think, real good quality going on around. And I reckon, to your point there, if we can just stick really, really solid with those blokes, if they're playing 14 test matches a year, then those core guys, the spines, they're playing 12 of the 14 and starting in those.
So Lolesio, there's still going to be debate around him because I'm curious to see, I'll ask Bernard this later on, like that Prendergast, the fly half, is kind of rookie 10, but he's physical. He's kind of a strapping lad. He's got a big boot about him. He's got a great skill set early on. It's the sort of prototype of a 10 that you quite like the look of. Noah Lolesio is not necessarily that. He's not the biggest 10. He doesn't have the biggest boot. He hasn't won 1,000 test matches, has he? He hasn't led a side to a championship outside of a Super Rugby AU tournament in 2020. But the fact that he's now played about 30 test matches, like, I can't see anyone else wearing the 10 jersey against the Lions unless there's a massive form drop-off or an injury. But what are some of the parts of the game about Noah that you like and that you think that, because he's off contract at the end of next year, there's about 10 of them that are. Lenny Ikitau's one, Harry Wilson, Fraser McWright, Tom Wright, the list goes on and on. But someone like a Lolesio, do you think he's, both in the short term and long term, can be a player that the Wallabies build a side around? Should Australian rugby people, officials from Rugby Australia, be looking and thinking that way about Noah Lolesio?
Well, I think, to your point there, that they've certainly put the investment into him. They're selecting him on a regular basis. Sure, there's certain parts to his game that, I would be able to see that need to be certainly worked on and improved. And I think probably the most obvious one is his kicking game. He's around the park kicking game, especially his long kicking game. You need, I think, a little bit more extra yardage. If you look at Tom Wright, whenever he punts the ball compared to a Noah, it's an extra 10 yards on the ball. So I think there's an area there that he certainly needs to work on, and that's more just about his technique. He seems to kick it a little bit higher rather than flatter in the air. So, but again, that'll just come with experience. I think his goal kicking, to be fair, I think is going really, really well, and that's a massive area in any international fly halves game. It needs to be, up there. And we talk about Johnny Sexton. That's where he was for so long, and hence the reason why Ireland had such great success. But I think, the things I've been really interested in and I guess really keen to observe has been around his poise. And I think that was one thing, as I mentioned to you earlier on, about, picking his time to make sure and when to go. And I think that's been an area of the game which has certainly improved. He's always, he's a solid defensive player. He's never going to be a big hitting 10. I don't think that's ever going to be expected of him. But it's just those little parts to your game. And at the end of the day, he's your quarterback. People look at and players look at the 10 as being the quarterback. Can he put us in the right areas of the field? And then can he get us over the line scoring points and making the right decisions? And from what I'm seeing, his improvement has been very, very gradual. And I think he's on a really, really good path. And I think the way the only way he'll continue to get on that path or continue on the path is if he keeps getting selected. There's no point selecting him now and then all of a sudden, we're going to pick someone else. We're going to pick 3 or 4 other guys, give them a go for 5 or 6 tests. Like, that's no good for anyone. And again, I know, Joe Schmidt, being the quality coach he is, he'll do what's right for the Wallabies. And I reckon at this stage, Noel's the man.
Yeah, I can't see anyone else. Like the fact that Ben Donaldson rarely used throughout the year, spent a lot of time on the bench, but rarely saw minutes. Tate Edmund, unfortunately, just had a couple of minutes out there before getting a head knock. But you're not going to throw a one-test fly half in to take on the Lions. And Tom Liner's only had a couple off the bench. He's 21, doesn't have the runs, the time in the saddle and the runs on the board necessarily to be thought of as a starting 10 option against the Lions next year either. So I think that for the very least, for the short term, it'll be all in on Noah. But the idea of two things there, poise, like that was the word that stood out to me that you just said around Noah Lolesio, starting to look and feel comfortable out in the international stage. Like that's not... It surely isn't an easy thing, because I know that in Australia, crowds, they can be pretty quiet. It might be like going to church on a Sunday, but you compare that to around the world and 60,000 at the Aviva on the weekend. It is a completely different kettle of fish playing in front of packed crowds in Europe, isn't it?
Oh, there's no question. As I said on the pod last week, to me, seeing that Scottish environment they created up at Murrayfield, like I've never seen Murrayfield like that. I really haven't. And it was unreal. Again, for all aspects, if you're a Scottish player, if you're a Wallaby player, if you're either of the two fans, it would have been so special to be there. And again, Noel would have learned from that, and he would have learned again from the weekend. You could see how disappointed he was right at the end of the game when, they had the ball at the end of the game. They had opportunity to potentially work their way up the field and either go for a droppy to get a draw or a penalty to get a draw or potentially somehow score points, which is what they did against England in the dying stages. He was really, really devastated. So I think, for me personally, I can honestly say as a fly half, and I guess in most positions, but certainly as a fly half, if you feel the backing of your coach and then ultimately then of your teammates, because that's what it's all about. It's all about who's on that field with you and who's behind you. If you feel that they're behind you, I can guarantee you your game will go to a different level. And I think that's what's currently happening. He's got the support of the players and he's got the support of the coach. And I think that's why we're seeing the great improvements in him currently. Yeah,
totally. Your point around the kicking technique, that is definitely going to be an area where he's got to have to improve against, in time for the Lions, because let's be honest, whoever's wearing the 10 jersey for the Lions, they're going to be a pretty good player if you're the best of four nations there, when you've got, the calibre of Finn Russell and Marcus Smith knocking down the door as well. And then the amount of fullbacks and outside backs that'll be coming down under, it's a scary thought. Mick Byrne, I'll tell you what, he would be a handy kicking coach for someone like a Noah Lolesio right now. And you wonder who that person might be. I know Berrick Barnes kind of goes between being up in Japan and being back down here as well. But Andrew Mertens has been used in that role area. But Dan Parks, are you going to put your hand up to help out there?
I'd love to help out if that was an option. Yeah, no, but again, he's got all. He can clearly kick the ball. As I said, his goal kicking, I reckon, has been really awesome. There's just a little technique thing there, and again, that's not a hard thing to improve. It's just a little thing, but again, I'm sure he'll keep working on it. And if I get the opportunity, I'd love to work with him. But it's those little things. They're fine little technique things, and it's the same with all positions of any particular skill required. It's just a fine little detail, and once you get that confidence and can replicate it, then you can fix it pretty quickly.
Was a pretty handy coach and former player like Stephen Larkham down at the Brumbies as well. So hopefully he's in a good space there. All right, we're going to go to Bernard Jackman, and then on the other side of this, the report card of the Wallabies in 2024. Well, it's a very good morning to Bernard Jackman, the former Irish hooker. Dan Parks has had to jump to a function, a Scottish function. He's going back to his roots in Scotland. But I've brought in a man that knows Irish rugby better than most people, knows Joe Schmidt better than most people, and there was there on Saturday afternoon at the Aviva. Bernard Jackman, thanks for coming on the Raw Rugby podcast.
Yeah, no, good to chat to you, Christy. Looking forward to chatting about Ireland, Australia.
Tell me, what was your impression of the game? Because 22-19, and there was a fair bit of optimism around the Wallabies over the last month that's just kind of swept up from down under with wins against England and Wales. It was obviously dented against Scotland, but to run Ireland pretty close, funnily enough, the third straight time between the two nations at the Aviva, a 3-point margin. But what were your impressions of Ireland against Australia?
Yeah, very tight game. Very lucky for Ireland to win it. Had to come from behind. Ironically, we played some of our best attacking rugby in this game in all of November. So we had 4 tests in November. This is our last test, and Irish teams tend to get better the longer they spend with Andy Farrell, and I think that was certainly the case. But we couldn't really hurt the Australian defence as we would have hoped, and I think that's down to how much improvement they've made in that area. I think we were all expecting, a big feature of Joe Schmidt, his coaching when he was in Ireland was, whether it was with Ireland or with Leinster, was his ability to see opportunities in opposition's defences, and we were all expecting to see something special from Joe that would target Ireland in an area we hadn't seen before. But I actually think what he probably did all week was he worked out how to stop Ireland defensively. And looking at Australia over the last year, that was probably the area that I worried most about with Joe, is that I had no doubt he was going to fix the breakdown. I had no doubt he was going to fix the tactical smarts, because he's such a brilliant coach. But defensively, Australia have been giving up quite a few points, and I think for me that was even last week against Scotland, I thought defensively Australia were a little bit porous, whereas on Saturday in the Aviva in Dublin, I thought Australia defended very, very well, very smartly, with good discipline, and that's a big step forward for Australia.
It's funny, the reaction has been pretty positive about where the Wallabies are at the moment. Generally, a side is either happy or unhappy whether or not they win or lose. Who do you actually think was happier coming out of the test? Was it Andy Farrell still?
Yeah, no.
Right.
Farrell was relieved to win, but we probably finished this November, and it's obviously Andy Farrell's last game before the Lions tour. He's gone sabbatical now, but just a little bit of concern around our form, particularly our attack. Delighted to beat Australia, delighted to beat Argentina, but obviously we started off very poorly against the All Blacks. So yeah, we were delighted to win, but I don't think we answered all the questions that were there about us. Whereas I think Australia will say this tour has moved them on in a big way. They now have better clarity around what formations, what players are going to be important against the Lions, and getting more games under Joe. And I suppose the nature of the tour, in terms of obviously beating England last minute, was massive. Hammering Wales, a step back against Scotland, but then bouncing back against Ireland, and a better performance. I think Joe Schmidt will be the happier of the two coaches.
I was with you in November 2022 when the Wallabies pushed Ireland 13-10, and then we were both in France for what was an extraordinary campaign for a number of reasons with the Wallabies. Are you surprised? Are you delighted about the progress? How much progress do you think has been made, and how much more progress is there between now and, say, the third Lions test, the start of August next year, that can occur under a Joe Schmidt coaching environment?
Yeah, look, in November 2 years ago, under Dave Rennie, Australia ran an Irish team who were probably in better form, close. Obviously, we saw what happened in the World Cup, and we don't need to go back there. But now, this November, I'm very comfortable and happy that Australian rugby is back. I mean, like, if you think about how Ireland got their last try against Australia on Saturday night, it was from our line-out maul, and we saw the impact of Skelton in terms of how much better the Australian maul D is with him there. There's no Karevi. Australia are going to be stronger. Suwali is going to be better. You had Tupu coming back from being left out for a while was excellent. I thought you've got Angus Bell probably could be in a World 15. So at loose edge you've got McGrath. So Yeah, and as I said, I believe massively in Schmidt, and everyone who's seen him in Ireland knows what he can do. I mean, it was a massive coup from the ARU to get him, and I think you're on the right track. And I think this Lions Test series is going to be a phenomenal Test series because you'll have the cohesion that you've built up over the last year with Joe. Farrell is going to have to try and get 4 countries into one, and doesn't automatically mean they're going to be better than any of the 4. So pressure's on. I'd say pressure's on Farrell as much as Joe Schmidt now. I think Joe Schmidt started the journey and is is a long way down that road.
Is there even more pressure on Andy Farrell and the Lions? Like only a couple of months ago, most pundits were laughing about the Wallabies, thinking that they were going to romp over in the series. There was no pressure on. Clearly, Joe Schmidt's a man that has high expectations and of himself as much as anyone else. But do you think that all the pressure's on the Lions coming down here?
No, absolutely. And I actually just think a small thing like the new trial laws around the escorts and the way the game has changed now to favour people who have really good athleticism in the air. I mean, that's something that the Australian team has that Joe Schmidt will tap into. So, definitely the fact that Australia have improved in terms of what they're doing. There's obviously seen better environment, better team spirits, better game plan. But just a little small tweak in the laws can actually give the Wallabies even more advantage. And now Farrell maybe has to try and pick players who have that aerial ability as well. So this is a big Lions tour now for the British and Irish Lions, whereas a year ago or 6 months ago we're probably thinking is it going to do damage to the Lions brand? I mean, it's funny how things change quickly.
Yeah, it certainly is. What have you made about Schmidt? Like, did you see? Like, it looked to me pretty obvious the Noah Lolesio out the back play that ended up with the Max Jorgensen try. That looked very Johnny Sexton Irish rugby-esque. Have you seen any similarities between how Joe's operated as head coach with Ireland to what he's doing now, or do you think that because of the caliber of athlete that Australia often produces, particularly in the back line, can the game that Joe Schmidt might have wanted to adopt with Ireland, can it be even perhaps better with the Wallabies, with the athletes that sometimes they produce?
100%. And Joe Schmidt, look, the game plan that maybe people remember Joe Schmidt for, which is the 2018 type game, which Ireland got to win the world and broke so many records from an Irish rugby point of view. It was quite a closed game plan. Okay, we had the Sexton loop, and there was times when we played, but our general phase attack wasn't really attractive or easy or pleasing on the eye. And a lot of that was down to the cattle, the quality of players we have. Sorry, the attributes of those players. They're quality players, but just have different attributes than an All Blacks backline or a Wallabies backline. And I think you'll see Joe being a lot more ambitious. And even at the weekend, they wanted to play out their own 22. They wanted to play out their own half because he obviously felt that they could threaten Ireland from there. It didn't work, but he now knows a little bit more about his team. So absolutely, there's definitely more athleticism, more speed, I think, as well in that Australian back three, no matter what way he goes. And I think he will want to get the ball in their hands and they'll play. And he's capable of coaching in many different ways, but it'll always be around the skill set and attributes of the players he has.
Roger Gould, he was on the pod just a couple of weeks ago, and he spoke about what he was bewildered but really thrilled to see the Wallabies change their tactics on this tour. Went from kicking the leather off the ball at times to what we're talking about now, running the ball even from inside the 22. And they did that a lot against England. Yeah, they did try it again against Ireland without the same success. But would he have ever done that, Joe Schmidt, with an Irish side, or is this something that plays to the strength of guys like Tom Wright and obviously Joseph Suaalii as well? But there's clearly others in the back line that are potent too.
Yeah, no, I think he would have. Like he did it with Leinster when he had O'Driscoll and Shane Horgan and Sexton and Darcy and had them playing amazing rugby. But I think he realised that at test level, it was going to be a lot harder with those players. Some of those players retired. So then he changed the game plan to be a little bit more attritional. But I've no doubt that he will. What you're seeing is his understanding of what he has, and also their understanding of how to do it. And he's like, it's the easy thing in the world to do is to create a kicking game, and that's often the first thing coaches will go to, and then you add layers. So I think you're seeing more balance to how they want to play. You're seeing them being effective do it, and by the time, I know they don't have many test matches, but I heard him say afterwards in the press conference they've got to get together just in early January just to review and put this to bed, and then they will, obviously, the training camp they do before the Lions tour, they can start to fine tune it, and they'll be very clear. That's the thing. Joe Schmidt, if you ask any player who played under in Ireland, the biggest thing about Joe was clarity, and clarity gives confidence. So I've no doubt the Wallabies will have clarity. They'll be confident that game plan they have and how they're set up will give them the confidence to beat any British and Irish Lions team.
Do you think the Wallabies can get a test or two against the Lions?
Yeah, I do, Christy. I think there's massive growth in this team. I mean, you've got 4 or 5 players who on any given day can take a game by the scruff of the neck, and I think it's an exciting transformation. Really, given where you come from, they're on the right track.
Last one, the Wallabies season, I think, has been defined by a bit of their selection, the continuity, the growth of a lot of the core players at hooker with Matt Fezler, to Noah Lolosio, Tom Wright as well. One player that you might not have seen as much on the weekend, but comes with a massive pay wicket, is Joseph Suaalii. Where do you think in next year against the Lions you might see him, knowing his ability in the air and the fact that he probably didn't get as much ball on the weekend as he would have hoped at outside centre?
No, I still see him at outside centre. I think he's a phenomenal athlete. I was doing some corporate hospitality and I was telling people in boxes there, watch this guy, he is special, because a lot of them wouldn't have heard a lot about him, and I think, obviously he has the aerial ability. I mean, how Joe's using him on restarts is really intelligent, and he's a handful for anybody. But that debut against England, I mean, just how comfortable he was, his ability to offload the ball in a way that we haven't seen from any other players. I mean, it's different, his athleticism. And look, he didn't get much ball the weekend because Ireland had a lot of possession, but he doesn't need to get much ball. He can have 2 or 3 impacts in a game and it can change a game. So I see him staying at 13, and I think he's just going to be like, he is going to be someone up there with the Antoine Duponts or the Chels and Kobe's or Estebets. Peter Steph Dutois. That's how good he's going to be. What a signing by the ARU, and it's a great boost for rugby union to have another superstar, come into the game.
Certainly is. Hey, Bernard Jackman, thanks so much for joining the Raw Rugby podcast. You can check out his work in the Irish Independent and, of course, on television too, all across social media. So please reach out to him, follow him on Twitter or now X, and, of course, all over the internet. Hey, thanks again, Bernard.
Thanks, Christy. See you in the summer.
Okay, mate. Awesome to talk to Bernard Jackman there, a man with so much experience, knows what he's talking about, and provides such a great insight about the game and watches a lot of footy. So appreciate his time. Dan, let's get to the report card and let's think about a Wallabies grading for the year. Off the back of last year, probably rock bottom, 2 from 9 in 2023. To be 6 from 13 in Joe Schmidt's first season in charge, when you've got 6 games in the Rugby Championship, 3 tests in total against Wales that Australia won all 3 of those matches. How would you give a Wallabies grading this year? A, B, C, D, E, F? We could get going if you want, but where would it be for you?
I think that's a very difficult question because you can't just judge it on, I don't think right now, on wins and losses. That's me personally. I don't think it's about that. I think it was all around the improvement, and it was always going to be difficult. If you look at the competition they started playing in, the championship, you've got South Africa, who is literally or pretty much unbeatable. So that's just the reality of things right now. And they were his first tests. Argentina are an extremely difficult team to beat, as we all know, especially at home. And then obviously the All Blacks. Like it's a pretty tough start to a campaign. And then obviously they had the tour over in the Autumn Nations where they had 2 from 4. So 6 from 13. I would have to say, for me personally, I think you're sitting at about a 7. And I think knowing, where from what I'm seeing with the Wallabies, I can only see that going up. So if we're saying that their first year in with Joe has been a 7, then I'd like to think it's only going to improve from there. And to me, that's pretty exciting. I think that's a really exciting thought. If you think about everything that's coming up for Australian rugby, for the Wallabies with the Lions tour, like there's so much expectation, excitement. I'm sure we're all part of different WhatsApp groups or different groups that are talking about this. People organising tickets. It's going to be special. And the great thing is it's going all over Australia for all these games. And, the Wallabies and the provincial sides are aware they've got to be up for it. And I have no doubt they will be. This is a very important, group of matches that's coming up. What are we at? Like 6 months away, 7 months away? So it's, I think it's a good, I'd say the Wallabies are in a good place, but in comparison to 1 month ago, there would have been a lot of concern, whereas I think now there's a lot more hope and belief in the fact that there can be some good results coming.
I agree. I think a 7 is probably a good grading. Maybe a B minus, definitely at the very least a C plus. I think from where Joe Schmidt's taken the side to where they are now, I think they are going to be competitive, and they're going to be competitive every test as long as they keep the penalty count low and they get their core fundamentals right from a set piece point of view. Rob Valentini took out the John Eales medal. Would you say that he's been, it's been 4 test matches since, but has he been Australia's best player?
I think so. I think his physicality it's grown so much I believe, in recent years. And he's just a powerhouse. Yeah, I think that, I'd have to agree with that. I think there's other people in and around the squad. We've mentioned them already, which have been extremely consistent. Andrew Kellaway clearly being one of those. He'd probably be, I'd say, just about the first name on the team sheet week in and week out. But I'd have to say Rob Valentini, I would say, certainly deserved Player of the Year this year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would have Tom Wright as maybe the most improved player. I think he's been, I don't know if you can quite describe it as a breakout year because he's been in the international game for quite a while now, but I would say he's the most improved player. I'd look there. Fraser McWright's been outstanding, but I think we all expected him to be great, didn't we? Because he was number 7 for the majority of last year's World Cup campaign, but he's grown another leg, like from where he has been in the last year or two. He's now one of the better 7s in the world, not just in Australia. Yeah,
I think he proved that again on the weekend. I think if you look at the Scotland game, there was a lot of questions around why he didn't play. It's a 4-match tour. I think he was really missed, in particular in attack last week. And you saw just the little impacts he has each and every single time he's near the ball. If he's not, on the ball defensively, getting on top of it and getting penalties for his side in attack, he's just a different level. I've watched him a lot more this year, and I've seen the impact he has on teams, and I think it's a pretty exciting prospect, him at 7 for the next however many years.
Well, that's the exciting thing, like the impact he has on games, and that's the key word about what makes a world-class player. If they're influential for their team in every area of the game, and he totally is. So, good shout. What about a rookie of the year? There's been 19 debutants, most since 1958. It's an extraordinary number. Who do you think has been the best breakout rookie of the 2024 season?
Well, again, there's, you mentioned 19 players. I think the most obvious one is probably Max Jorgensen. I think his age, and I think he's only going to get better. He's going to fill out as well. I think that's a really exciting part. Everyone knows he's been a massive schoolboy star. He came into the Waratahs at the start of this year, I think it was. Was it this year or last year?
Last year, 2023, yeah.
It happened so quickly. So at the start of last year, what's that, 18 months, 19 months or something along those lines. And all of a sudden, he's not necessarily a household name, but I think in years to come he will be. But I reckon, he's going to continue to fill out. And I think once that starts to happen, you really see him come into a different level. But I think even while, on the tour, he's had some really good impacts in games. But there's plenty of guys. There's a lot of young guys up front. Kalia, there was the hooker from Queensland. I'm trying to.
Yeah, well, it's second season, but realistically, it was Dave Parecki that was starting last year for the Wallabies, and it was shared between Wallace and Fezler for the replacement role. But yeah, he's just been one of Australia's most consistent players this year, Matt Fezler. So it's been an incredible year for him. I would say it's interesting that you say Max Jorgensen. Obviously, he went to the World Cup last year, but he didn't actually get on the field. So it was heartbreak for him there with yet another injury. But where his best position is, where he's going to play for the Waratahs in 2025, it's going to be fascinating what happens with that back line, particularly with Jorgensen, Kellaway, and Suwali in the same back line. I think it'll be fascinating. I'm not convinced that Suwali's best position is at 13. I still think it's possibly on the wing for the time being. It's such a... 13s can kind of go in and out of the game, can't they? Like, at times,
yep.
They tried it with Israel Folau and it didn't necessarily work because he didn't actually get his hands on the ball nearly as much as he wanted. So, yeah, it'll be fascinating. What would you do with Suwali for 2025? Well, you just
mentioned someone's very important name then, Israel Folau. And where was his best position? And, at 15. And I think if you look at potentially what will happen over time, possibly not straight away, that's, I think, where he's going to have most impact on games. Because even on the weekend, like, he wasn't in the game for a long period in that first half in particular. He didn't touch the ball very often. He had a couple of touches, I guess, as the game went on, but he didn't have a great impact early. Whereas if you look at his first game against England, some of his early touches were just unreal. And I think that was the moment everyone's like, wow, this is going to be awesome. The Wallabies are back. They've got someone to, really pin their hopes on. So I personally think it'll be 15. But, Dan McKellar, what a great, I guess, prospect. First couple of months in charge at the Waratahs, he's going to have all these different options, barring any injury crisis. But hopefully that's not the case. And if they're all fit and available, it's a pretty exciting time, I have to say, for the Waratahs, because there's some high-quality players all across the park.
Totally is. All right. I would go Rookie of the Year to Jeremy Williams. I think he's been brilliant in the second row. I loved Isaac Kalia and what he did. I'm sure he'll play many more minutes next year. Whether or not James Slipper plays against the Lions, who knows? But I did think he actually made a good fist of it starting in the absence of Angus Bell on the weekend. I thought that was a really good moment, probably to sign off from his Test rugby up in the Northern Hemisphere, I'd say. I'm not sure if he'll go back. So fair play to James Slipper there. We've already spoken about the Wallabies. We know desperately that Joe Schmidt, you want to see him stay beyond next year and next year's Lions series. Like, these meetings, I know that there's an official meeting set in a couple of weeks' time once that Joe's kind of finished up in Ireland seeing his daughter and then goes back home to New Zealand for a week or so. But those meetings are already happening, and they've been happening for weeks and weeks. Like, Phil Ward's not up in the British Isles for a month and not talking to Joe Schmidt about his future. Easy. Like that, they're definitely having conversations, and they would have had quite a few already, you'd think.
I think there's no question. I think, when Joe initially took on the role of Wallabies coach, I would like to think that he had in his mind it was going to go to the next World Cup at least. Now, again, I don't know for sure, but I would like to hope that was the case, because I can honestly tell you now, the playing group that are being coached by Joe, I can tell you one thing is for sure, they will not want him to be leaving, because they know the impact you can clearly see the impact he as a man has had on this squad. There is no question he has made an unbelievable difference already to what this Wallaby side is doing. So you think about that. If he can stay on, post the Lions, hopefully there's success there. And then those next couple of years leading into the World Cup, like, it'll be absolutely huge for Australian rugby. So, yeah, I would like to think that the great Phil Waugh is doing his best. He's putting his best foot forward to cement Joe Schmidt as the Wallabies coach for the next couple of years.
Yeah, you're mounting that case. It's interesting that when Joe Schmidt took over at Ireland, it was 2013. They were probably at their peak 2018. which is 4 or 5 years along that journey. And perhaps by the end of 2019, it did seem like some of the commentary coming out of players like Roy at best is that it was maybe coming to that end, and it needed to end because it was just all consuming with Joe Schmidt. I reckon 4 years, that'll be the perfect point perhaps for where he needs to take this side. So he might not have had the success at World Cups that he would have wanted from a head coaching perspective, but he would have learned so much, I think, from that time with Ireland around how to manage a playing group throughout a 4-year period. And it was interesting hearing Tom Wright talk about Joe Schmidt on the weekend, or just before the game rather, following the team announcement. And Tom Wright was talking about, to begin with, he would almost apologise if he gave a player a bit of a serving, if he wasn't quite happy with them, missing a line or whatever it might have been during the training. But 6-7 months into knowing how this man operates, they're pretty happy to actually hear it, and they realise that Joe Schmidt's now feeling comfortable enough to be able to do that as head coach as well. So that was an interesting one. Let's just quickly run through what a 23 might look like against the Lions. Do you think there'll be much change? Like, there was a couple of players that were missing this year. No Dave Parecki, no Rob Leota, both guys that go to the World Cup. Will Skelton wasn't there on the weekend. Samu Karevi, of course, wasn't there either. Both that played on the end of year spring tour. What changes would you make? And would you be starting a Taniela Tupou or an Alan Alatoa at the moment? It possibly doesn't matter. But if you were to run in from a 1 to 15, are we thinking that Angus Bell is clear by far and away you're starting loose head at a starting point?
Yeah, I think his work in particular in the loose around the field, there's no one at that level. Like, his ability to carry as he does is quite remarkable for a front rower, and just to continuously do it and to want the ball all the time. So I would have to say, yeah, he would have to be close to being that one. I don't think there's any question around that. I think the two, as you mentioned earlier on, Fessler's been very, very impressive. Parecki's been out injured. Paenga and Mosa. You've got a lot of options there. And back to our talk earlier on around that spine, what's the best way? If you look at, in times gone by, or even current success stories of teams, they generally stick with their hooker. So, that's an interesting one around Parecki in particular. He's been out for a long time. Do you bring him straight back in, or do you stick with the likes of a Fessler?
Yeah, I'd be thinking Fessler to start with. I know that they really rate Paenga and Moses scrummaging. Probably one of the best scrummagers there, and obviously he's a bit heavier as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if BPA ends up at some point in time packing down at 2, but I think Fessler would start. I liked Taniela Tupou from if he gets back to full fitness. He's a scary prospect. We saw what he can do on the weekend. He wasn't quite as damaging ball in hand running into the defensive line, but he's a special player, and he's another guy off contract. You'd be desperate to re-sign him. You don't want to break the bank, but it's a pretty important couple of years coming up. Who would you have at 3 next year for the Lions if both Alatoa and Tupou are fully fit?
Well, again, I don't think it would really matter, to be honest. I think they pretty much are going to play the same sort of minutes. I think if you look at how it's currently done, one might start for 45 and then the other one comes on for the final 35. I think that's pretty standard in that role. So I don't think it's really going to matter. I think we've seen the impact. I think Taniela to start, I'd probably say, and I'd bring Alan the more steadying influence on the team for the back end of the game. That's probably where I would see it going. Second row is an interesting, many different interesting options. You talked about Jeremy Williams before. Does he potentially go into the back row? We've already talked earlier on. The 6, 7, and 8, I would have to say, are settled if you ask me. So I think the big question is, Will Skelton, and who's your other option there potentially in the second row?
Yeah, okay. So that's probably the big question of all of this is, would you start Skelton? Because if you're starting Skelton, it maybe changes the dimension of your back 5 forwards. So are you starting Skelton against the Lions or not?
I would probably have to say yes, just because he's a beast, right? And I think every time he plays for Wallabies, is extremely influential. So I would be looking at potentially someone like him, and then a real potential like a Frost. He could be the next option to go alongside a Skelton. And then for me, I know it potentially takes away. I think, McWright's always a line-out option, but I would have to say you'd have to go 6, 7, and 8 from the weekend. If you look at who they are, Valentini, outstanding, McWright, outstanding, and Wilson, he's more than likely going to be your skipper.
Yeah, okay. That's an interesting one. I reckon at some point throughout the series, you'll have someone else at 6, like a Williams or maybe even a Lukan Salakai-Loto. But I think for the first test, it's hard to predict. Obviously, injuries can completely change things. But at some point in time, I think there'll be a taller 6 option with Valentini going to 8. But I do like the balance of the back row at the moment, and what they do, they're complementing each other, the physical nature of Valentini and then the link play nature of what Wilson and McWright can do as well.
I think the great thing, what we're talking about now, is we're having this, not debate, but we're having a discussion around all these different options. If you go back a month or two, we're probably not having those discussions because we actually wouldn't have a clue. And the great thing is a lot of these blokes have impressed, Williams being one on the tour. Frost, I think, has been another one that's really impressed. So they're now really putting their hands up, which to me is what I was saying earlier. This is a really positive sign. It's positive signs for the game. It's positive signs for Wallabies rugby and for what's going to be huge next year.
Yeah, it certainly is. The other thing to consider is that Skelton's going to be coming in after a long year in France. You're probably joining the side maybe a little bit later. So maybe he comes off the bench and then that way you can maybe rejig the back row anyway, because you might be bringing in a taller or shifting one of the second rowers to the back row for perhaps a Wilson, whoever it might be, to make way with 20 minutes to go or so. But I like the combination as well with Skelton and Frost. The fact that they've now played a couple of years together, they played at the World Cup. They spent the lead in with the Rugby Championship, so they know each other really well. And Frosty's the tallest line-out option there, 206 centimetres. So can't argue with that. Are we pretty set in stone with Jake Gordon? I'll see you at 9 and 10.
I would say so. I think unless something happens completely out of the ordinary, I think everyone knows there's big raps on Teddy Wilson at the Waratahs. From what we're seeing in Clubland, he's a phenomenal talent. Timing's pretty good too. Obviously with Jake, I think he's in his early 30s now, so the future looks bright there for the Waratahs. But it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out as well at Waratahs level. But you'd have to say Jake has certainly got the front row seat. With I'd have to say Noel Alessio. There's no question. I think they're going to be starting 9 and 10 at this stage.
Okay. What about 12 and 13? I reckon we might be on different eyes here, and we haven't even spoken about this, but who would be with everyone being fit, your 12 and 13 to start against the Lions?
Yeah, this will be an interesting one because, I'm a massive fan of Samu Kerevi. I'm a huge fan of him. Got his 50th cap. Very, very unfortunately got sent off, which I thought was really, really harsh, but it's just the way of the game at the moment. But still, I really felt for him. I'm a big fan of his. I'd like to see him potentially be at 12. And I think Ikitau, his form is through the roof. So they would be my 12 and 13 at this point.
I can't believe it. We're thinking the exact same lines. I'm having Kerevi at 12. I just think the physicality that he can provide. He's the guy that can do the Bundy Aki against the Lions, and maybe Aki will be playing. It might depend on the combinations, but of what the Lions do. I love the Finn Russell Tuipulotu combination, but Aki's hard to go past. He was nominated for World Player of the Year last year. He's a heck of a talent. So, I think a bigger 12 will be crucial. I don't know if we've seen the consistency of Hunter Paisami to go, he should be starting at 12 against the Lions yet. Kerevi's just frame and poise out there. He's, I think, a really important player for next year. What does that mean for the back three for you if you're picking a back three? Well,
I think 15 has to be Tom Wright at this stage. I don't think you can. Again, things might change when we talked about potentially Akusa Suli, if he plays at 15 for the Waratahs, potentially what will happen there? What impact will he have? He could come out and be the most unbelievable player that the code's ever seen. But I would more at this stage go with a Tom Wright at 15. Akusosuli at 11 and Kellaway at 14 would be the makeup of my back three at this stage.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty bang on. I'll go the same. I think the one player that's going to push that and challenge it would be Jorgensen on the wing, maybe with Kellaway. Kellaway's experience is really crucial. I don't think I actually saw the best of him on the weekend. He spilled a couple of balls with ball in hand, and defensively almost got found out, but he managed to hang on, didn't he, and get back to make that try saver with Keegan. But that'll be a crucial one. Where does Kellaway fit next season? He's still definitely young enough. He's basically not even 30 yet, so he's definitely got years in front of him. I think the bench will probably pick itself with a BPA. If Slips is around, it's probably a toss-up between him and Isaac Kalia. We know that if Talon is starting, Alan Alatoa is there. Lucan Salakai-Loto is probably your replacement lock at the moment if you don't start Skelton or maybe a Jeremy Williams, but there's some options. So that's an exciting thing.
And I think the options there are they can both play in the second row or in the back row as well. If required at some point, they can always, make their way into those different positions. We've talked about it already, but that's the beauty of, I think, where the Wallabies are. They've blooded a lot of players under the Schmidt regime, and now there's plenty of options because they're all playing well. I think Langy Gleeson has been part of pretty much, I think, every game for the tour off the bench, and he's played a significant role there. So, again, he'll be someone that's building in confidence.
Tate McDermott, replacement 9, you've got to think just what he can provide. That's pretty obvious to me, have on the bench there.
Well, again, looking at who's been used, obviously there's Nick White as an option, but you'd have to say Tate, he's got plenty of energy, quick, he's dangerous around the edges, and we're going to need that. We're going to need that at different times in order to score points. And I think that's a pretty obvious one. We sort of touched on it earlier on. It was very, very sad to see Tane Edmed unfortunately, last a couple of minutes. That was a real shame for him. You could see how devastated he was when he went off the field. But congratulations to him for getting capped. But that's certainly not how he would want that to go down. And from what we've seen, I think Joe Schmidt is really interested in seeing how Edmed develops. I know he's had he had quite an incredible season over in the NPC, and I think he certainly got a lot of confidence from that experience. And the fact of the matter is that Schmidt was watching him, wanting him to come on the tour, and has given him an opportunity to get capped, I think says a lot. So I think there's a fair chance he's going to get some minutes next year.
Yeah, okay. So would you think if you're picking a team at the moment, Edmund just in front of Donaldson, are you, or not?
Well, again, I don't think Donaldson's done anything wrong necessarily. I'm just coming at it from an angle where I think Schmidt might be thinking if we were to pick that squad right now. But in regards to that, Donaldson's done nothing wrong. And another point to that is if they're going to use him off the bench, his goal kicking has been very good as well. He's been pretty safe in that regard. So that's always going to be a key element, especially late in games. Blokes who you can trust to put those 3 and 2 points over.
Yeah, he's definitely done it recently. All right, last one then, 23. If you're going a Kellaway on the wing, I presume you'd have a Jorgensen off the bench. And
I think so. And again, back to that point, I think those two gentlemen mentioned, Donaldson and Edmed, they're both versatile. They can both 10-15, 10-12, and then you've got a Jorgensen that can cover that sort of the wing back, potentially centre at that point as well. He's going to be a couple of months more developed at that point. So, if you round up all that, what do we mention? Probably 25, 26 names there. I reckon, obviously being injury-free, that's a pretty strong looking outfit. And I'd be confident, that they could, certainly stretch the lines and potentially, do a job on them in game one.
You can only dare to dream. All right, mate. I reckon that's a pretty good wrap. It's a wrap on the year as well. It's amazing how many podcasts we've done. Matt Tamur for the first 10 months or so of it. We'll probably see him back next year during Super Rugby. But Dan, it's been so good to have you over the last month as well, bringing an absolute expertise around Northern Hemisphere rugby, what happens up in the British Isles. It's an exciting one to look forward to next year, mate.
Yeah, certainly is, Christy. And, mate, thanks very much. I really enjoyed this. And thanks to all the listeners out there. And, hopefully I'll see you guys again on the Raw.
Can't wait. Make sure you leave us a review. Get us in touch with what you want across for next year. I'm sure we'll be listening to Dan Parks a lot more as well. So until next year, thanks for listening to the Raw Rugby podcast. That's a wrap for 2024.